There are a number of fundamental asymmetries in the political and cultural battle between the left and the right. And one of the most obvious asymmetries is the way in which both sides approach the exchange of ideas. Conservatives tend to think that they're involved in a dialectic, that they're having a discussion with another group in good faith who might have a different point of view, but is also attempting to understand the truth and arrive at an agreed upon truth claim that society can build on going forward. Progressives in general understand that they are involved not in a discussion, but in a culture war. They understand that they are involved in a struggle for power. They understand that this struggle for power does not just occur in the strictly political function, but also occurs when having discussion. And so rather than having their public discourse aimed at attempting to convince others through a reasoned discussion, progressives understand that their job is to advance their power and therefore advance what they see as the truth. Progressives are not involved in some kind of examination or exploration or even negotiation over what the truth might be, what the consensus might be. The progressives are very confident that they have the truth. Because progressives are not busy hand-wringing about whether they've obtained the proper consensus for truth, they're instead able to focus their public actions on gaining and maintaining the power necessary to perpetuate that truth. And this is why we see that the left is just far more successful in their public actions than the right. The right is bringing the debate team, the left is bringing violent mobs. And I hate to break it to people, but well-reasoned arguments don't beat a brick to the face. Well-reasoned arguments don't beat someone burning down your house, burning down your store. Well-reasoned arguments don't beat someone getting you fired from your workplace and completely ostracized, making sure that you'll never be able to work again and your family shuns you. These things are not beaten by better, stronger arguments. The left believes that the discussion is over, and so they're no longer looking to bring the tools of civilized discussion. They're bringing the tools of cultural power, social censure, legal oppression, and even mob violence. Many who oppose the recent acceleration of cancel culture by progressives tend to be under the impression that the blatant hypocrisy shown by those who used to champion free speech, who used to champion the exchange of ideas, who used to champion the open mind, is eventually going to become just too obvious, and that the left will collapse under this hypocrisy that should now be obvious to everyone. A good example of this has recently come up with Barry Weiss leaving the opinion page of the New York Times. Barry Weiss, in any sane society, would be an extremely liberal and progressive person. But Barry Weiss is slightly different than your average progressive in that she has not completely swallowed the rabid destruction of the opposition. She still seems to hold some of the ideas that, even though she has in the past regularly canceled people and been more than happy to cancel people, she wants at least her version of free speech. She wants to at least hold on to the bit of the Overton window that she believes she currently resides in. And so she felt like she was being pushed out of the New York Times for her, I wouldn't say center-left views, but not completely progressive, on board for cancel culture views. Many of those who oppose cancel culture saw this as a win, because if this very liberal New York Times alum would leave the paper over cancel culture, then it must be so clear to everyone that the left has become hypocritical. They see this consolidation of power by the extreme progressives as a desperate act that actually shows the weakness and will make it clear to everyone that the left is no longer about the free exchange of ideas, that progressives are no longer about the marketplace, about having the discussions, about letting people think what they want and say what they want. They think that this this is a victory because it will be so obvious that the crazies have taken over the paper and there's no rational discussion left there, and everyone will now move to the center or to the right to actually have those types of discussions. But I think that's actually a misread of the situation. You see, many of these newly minted centrists or center-right people are really liberals who think that the left just went a little too far. They think that what is happening on the left right now, it's really just a manifestation of crazy, something got into the water in colleges. They don't see this as an aspect of the left. They don't see this as a natural outgrowth of progressivism. They see it as some kind of weird bug that worked its way into the system, and if they can just kind of cut that piece out, they'll be able to return to the logical progressivism that they had before this. What they don't seem to understand is that they're actually in the minority when it comes to the progressive movement. You see, the progressive movement never really cared about free speech. It never really cared about the free exchange of ideas. It was never really about intellectual openness. Initially, the United States and much of the West was a far more conservative place when many of these progressive ideas were first coming into being. And so in order to get those ideas into the public, they needed a Trojan horse, a cover, which would allow them to teach ideas like communism that were obviously very destructive to the individual and to the state and to society. But if you had this cover of free speech, if you had this cover of the free exchange of ideas saying, well, it doesn't matter if you agree or disagree with it. The important thing is that people are able to have these discussions and share them. This is what allowed them to get these ideas into places that otherwise would have rejected them. And so while the left spent a lot of time preaching free speech, even though progressives spent a lot of time talking about how much they valued the openness and sharing of ideas, the truth was they really just wanted a way to get their ideas into public consumption, and they were willing to adopt pretty much any kind of narrative necessary to allow them to do so. And the way that you can tell that this was not a sincerely held belief is that the left has been slowly but surely jettisoning this narrative as they go. Piece by piece, they have dropped off more and more of their support of free speech. More and more, they have stepped away from this free exchange of ideas. As their power has risen, their support for free speech has dropped. As their institutional power, as their cultural power has gone up, their support for free speech has gone down. That's not a bug, that's a feature. That was always what was going to happen. The left was never truly interested in these principles. What they were interested in was power, and they were willing to use these principles in order to consolidate that power when they were weak. There's a French author that explained this phenomenon with a really good quote. He said, "When I'm weaker than you, I ask for freedom because that is according to your principles. When I'm stronger than you, I take away your freedom because that is according to my principles." And so what we're seeing from the left right now is not truly hypocrisy. What we're seeing is that they are simply shifting their tactics because they no longer have to play the underdog. They no longer have to play the game as if they are weak. And so they no longer have to use the tools that you must use when you are weak. This shift in tactics does not bother the vast majority of progressives because they know the truth. They know what's right, and the goal was always to promote the truth and what was right, not to promote some vague idea of free speech or free exchange of ideas. The goal was always to obtain enough power to push the progressive worldview. It was never really about this idea of fairness and intellectual openness and balance of viewpoints. Now, there will, of course, always be people like Dave Rubin or Sam Harris or even maybe Barry Weiss who will buck at this idea, who will say, no, I really did believe in those principles. But on the whole, this is a small percentage of mainly, frankly, suckers who bought into the lie. And the left will be just fine without them. In fact, the left is more than fine to let those people drift over to the center or the right as apostates because they know that the power they're gaining is worth far more than whatever few public intellectuals they might lose. This grasp on every institution, on all of the political power, on the entire cultural apparatus is far more valuable than a few idiots who happened to be useful back when they were pushing this propaganda through as free speech. So while many on the right and the non-progressive center will point to this and say it's some kind of weakness, it's some kind of show of obvious hypocrisy that will take down the progressives, I think what we're actually seeing is not a show of weakness, but a show of strength. The left believes that it has achieved cultural hegemony to the point where it no longer has to pretend that it cares about these values anymore. That's not weakness, that's a flex. That is a vulgar display of power. And they're not doing it because they're in trouble, they're doing it because they believe that they have so much power they no longer have to play this game anymore. And this is why I am in general pretty skeptical of the idea that there'll be some kind of coalition of anti-progressive forces that will push back against the left. That the centrists and the normal liberals, the classical liberals who have abandoned the left and come over to the center of the right, they'll all band together and they'll be able to push back against the left by reasserting the values that used to be held by the West. I don't think that's going to work because I don't think you can fight the progressives by attempting to hold them to a vague set of values that are no longer really in force, that no longer really hold the cultural force that they used to. The arguments that the progressives used about free speech and free exchange of ideas to work their way into the academy, into the culture, into the media are not going to work for conservatives or centrists who want to fight back against them. They are closing that door behind them now that they have all the power. What those who oppose the progressives need is not some kind of loose coalition pushing vague values that are no longer held by the majority of the populace. What they need is a new dynamic message. What they need is a new kind of centralizing narrative to fight against the corrupt narrative that is now culturally ascendant on the left. What's going to fight these new cultural ideas, these new cultural values that are being solidified in our society is not going to be some kind of vague need to return to the 90s. What's going to combat that is a more powerful, more compelling, more true story about who we are and what we should be as a society. Moderates, conservatives, the right, whatever you want to call this loose coalition of people, we need to stop pretending that we're one really well-reasoned argument away from victory, that we're one really good Ben Shapiro debate away from turning this thing around. The times have changed. The rules have changed, and those that oppose the left are going to have to change if they want to have a hope of avoiding the ugly future that so many of us can see on the horizon. Thanks for watching the video, guys. If you liked it, please go ahead and click the like button. If you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and do so now. And as always, if you thought this video was interesting, please go ahead and share the video out. It really helps. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you next time.